Hello, and welcome to the second part of the CAIANH administration onboarding. What we went through last time was the administration team, the tools, and the policies, so you can see that on another video. Today, I'm going to go through some key procedures that that PRAs and PIs will often use, and some quick next steps of how to stay prepared as you're starting your job. So here's a list of the key procedures. It's not an exhaustive list, but I think it is a good place to start. And I made it so that you can come back to this presentation so that if you're doing one of these things, you can come back and see how to do it. So we're going to start with buying goods and supplies, and then I'll talk about travel, and then non-employee reimbursements, paying for services, event planning, and then processing your own funding distributions. So it's going to be, for all of these, we're going to do a quick, more of a broad overview. However, there's a lot more in depth that you can go, but this is just to get you started and to show you where the resources are to figure out how to do this new procedure. So to start, we're going to go through buying goods and supplies. So what I've shown you here on the screen is how to get to this process in FormStack. As we learned from the last presentation, you should always start with FormStack because it is way more complicated to purchase things than you think it is, and there are many more rules than you might imagine. So if you start in FormStack, when you start in FormStack, you will be able to see if this is even an allowable expense before you get started. So this is in the finance part of the form stack. Once you click into the finance part, then these are the options, and we are doing paying for goods and supplies. So these are some quick things that I find come up a lot when you are buying goods and supplies. And so when I'm talking about both goods and supplies, I'm thinking about research supplies for a project in the field, or yeah, that's the main one where we have if you're doing a study on site and you need specific project supplies, you would need to order goods and supplies. But there's a lot of other examples of tangible items that we need to purchase. So as I already said, always start with FormStack. And then these options in color here are how to best purchase these things. So Marketplace and Travel Card are both green because they are used for different things, but they are always the top option for those things. So Marketplace, if you can find something in Marketplace, you should always, always, always purchase it in Marketplace. It should always be your first step. Anything else is a backup. Travel card you should always use when you're on travel and if you have one. So those are both green. They have different purposes. P card, your procurement card, if you have one, would be your next best option if Marketplace is not an option for what you're purchasing. And then your personal card is the last option. You really should not use your personal card. If you don't have a P card, you need to either apply for one or find someone on your team who does have one who can make that purchase. So we really, personal cards are an exception. So if we see that you're asking for reimbursement on your personal card often, that counts as a procurement penalty. So you're not supposed to be doing that. So for our department, we do all IT purchases through HIP, and the reason is because there are very specific things that we need to purchase, and it is important that we are purchasing those through the marketplace and from the certain contracts that the university has in place. So even if you can find an IT item on Amazon and you see that it is cheaper than what we have in Marketplace, That is not a reason that you can purchase it on Amazon. You still need to go through HIP when you're making that purchase, and it needs to be made through Marketplace. You know, we have a large university, we make a lot of purchases, so we have certain contracts like with Dell, where we can only purchase from them because of those contracts. So when I say it needs to be purchased through HIP, I mean that you need to still do it through FormStack. So you should always still start with FormStack, but HIP will make the purchase after it is approved by someone from the fiscal team. So taxes is another thing that comes up a lot. The university is tax exempt from any purchases made in the state of Colorado. And this includes online purchases. So if you're buying something online and it's getting shipped to Colorado, it should be tax exempt. If you're buying something online and it's getting shipped to somewhere else, which should rarely happen, it cannot be tax exempt. It is required to have that tax exempt. So if we see that there is tax on something that you purchased inside the state of Colorado, then you will need to work with the supplier to get the tax removed. So this is a reason that we make sure that we like to use Marketplace, because the suppliers that are in Marketplace are already working with our tax exempt policy. So if you're working with a new supplier, you may have to work with them to figure out how to get that tax removed. If you work with a supplier that says that they cannot remove the tax, then you need to find a new supplier. It's as easy as that. So with a lot of these rules, the option is not to have an exception because you want to work with a certain supplier. The option is you need to find a different supplier. And in some cases, if we're noticing a pattern of taxes on your reconciliation, then there'll be a penalty on your procurement card, and it will not, and eventually and in many cases, if you are not able to get the tax removed, you will need to pay for the taxes out of your own pocket. And even if you got approval from a PI or from someone on your project to still make the purchase, please remember that if you hold the procurement card, you are liable for that expense of taxes. So these are just two rules that come up a lot as far as using different procurement methods. If you have a purchase that has a deposit, you need to make sure that the deposit is paid on the same procurement method as the actual purchase. So you can't put a deposit on a P card and then put the actual purchase through Marketplace. Similarly, you can't split purchases. So P cards have limits of how much money you can put on them and how much money you can have per expense. So if you have a $10,000 expense, you can't put $5,000 on each P card, on two different P cards. You would need to, of course, use Marketplace for that. So those are just some key things that come up, and we'll go into them a little bit more depth in a bit. So again, we talked a lot in the other training about our policies, and because we're working with sponsored projects, we have a lot more considerations when we're buying goods. So it is hard to purchase things, and the list that is on here are the sensitive expenses that are usually not allowed on sponsored federal projects. So this is, again, everything has a nuance, and if the project has gotten prior approval for one of these purchases, that's great. That means that we can purchase that, but that still means that we need to explain in the case of an audit. So the reason for that is, even if maybe honorarium, that's a sensitive expense. An honorarium is when we pay a speaker a kind of a token payment, where in a case where a actual fee for service isn't appropriate. So that's what an honorarium is, and it's very, very almost always not allowable on projects, but in some cases, it has been written directly into the grant, so we can purchase it. However, I work with a lot of grants, so I might not know that we've gotten prior approval. An auditor might not know that we got prior approval, even though we have it. So this is where the unallowable and sensitive cost justification form comes in. If we are looking to buy any of these purchases through P-card or through Marketplace, prior to making the purchase, we will need to fill out this form. Again, that's found on Marketplace, and it will lead you because it'll show you, oh, you're making a sensitive expense, please fill out this form. And again, I will emphasize that this is not meant just for me. It is also meant for an auditor, so it needs to be able to be taken entirely out of context. So for example, if I am wanting to purchase a stamps, right? So stamps is listed as something that's usually not allowed. But we have a project that is specifically part of the study is sending out public service announcements to people's addresses and seeing how successful that is as a method. So that, of course, has stamps written into the proposal, and it is a reasonable and allowable expense because it is necessary to carry out the project. But when I see postage, when I see stamps, when they come through for my approval, I say, wait a minute, that's not allowed. So when you're going through, you need to be really clear for why it has been prior approved. So you want to describe the item briefly, how much you estimate it will cost, and that is to make sure that there is enough funds. If there's more than one item, you can use a spreadsheet. And then if the purchase will be made more than once, so that if we need to, see this, if we need to be ready for this to come again. And then this is the most important question. What is the benefit to the project, and why is this a necessary purchase as a direct charge? So this can't just be like, because we need it. You need to show that it is beneficial because the study is meant to show this, and we need to be able to send things in the mail as written in the budget justification. So you need to provide a lot of information so someone coming in blind will be able to understand this. And then if it is written in the budget justification, like in the example, we ask you to upload your budget justification here. If you don't have the budget justification, your PI certainly does, so make sure to ask them. And again, this is going to be reviewed, and then you'll get an email that says, yes, this has been approved, or no, this is not allowable. And with that, you can then make the purchase. And then you also need to make sure that you're uploading this form when you reconcile the purchase if you're using your P card. And just to make sure that I've gone through every item to give you more context for these items. We've gone through stamps and honorarium. Building and space rentals are usually not allowed. They need to be written in, and that is and then recruitment or advertising supplies and services need to be written in as well. They're usually not allowed, and they need to be specific to the use of the purpose of the project. Professional dues and memberships are very, rarely allowed. So even if you're going to a conference that is written into your budget, and you get a cheaper conference price if you buy a membership, that membership still cannot go on a federal project. Food services and supplies, we talk about a lot. It needs very sensitive expense, and it needs to be written in. Books, periodicals, or subscriptions, even if it is like tangentially related to your research, it can only be purchased if it is directly needed for the project. An example is that we have a project where we work with early career scientists, and part of their budgets are to purchase books for their research, and that's written into the budget justification. Office supplies are very rarely allowed, and that's because they should be covered in our indirect costs. So if you need office supplies for your own use, that is supplied within the building here, as part of being part of the centers. If you need office supplies for specific reasons, like you're hosting a conference, or you are, that has like certain activities, or your research, like, a community group requires a specific materials to do the group, then that would be a reason that office supplies may be allowed. And official functions are sensitive because they require so many, because they require food, but it does again need to be written into the budget that we're doing an official function. And if you'd actually, for the official function, you don't need to fill out this unallowable and sensitive cost justification form. Instead, you would fill out the official function form. So that is a different process. So I'm gonna go a little bit more into each of our purchase methods. So next is the marketplace. First is the marketplace. So I'll show you what it looks like, because a lot of people haven't seen it before if you're just starting. So this is what my marketplace looks like, and it has a lot of information on purchasing. So once you do get access to marketplace, you can use the catalogs to make purchases of different kinds. The most common one that we use is Staples. So if you are looking for items for your project, Staples is probably the first place that you would go. Marketplace is always the preferred method because it is how the university tracks all these purchases. And it's a lot more traceable in the case of an audit. And also if something goes wrong, it's much easier to find a solution and fix the problem when it's in marketplace than when it's with a procurement card. So sometimes items are not available in marketplace, and that would be a time where you would then go to that unallowable form that we just went over, and you would use that form to explain why you're not making the purchase in marketplace. In some cases, if you're looking for an item and you can't find it, you can work with a purchasing agent to get that item available in marketplace. So they really are trying to have us use marketplace as much as possible for our purchases. And marketplace is required for purchases over $5,000. So you cannot put any item on a P card for more than $5,000. And you also cannot put any item on your personal card and ask for reimbursement for more than $5,000. So we are looking to move towards having PRAs become shoppers in marketplace, and we are looking to not have faculty with marketplace access. So this is a way just to delegate tasks, and to make it so that PRAs are able to have some autonomy as far as purchasing for their supplies. So the way that it works in marketplace is the shoppers can gather the things that they need in their cart, and then they submit, and then it goes to the requester, who is currently Lisa Lewis, and she will review your purchase and make sure that everything is allowable and that it has been prior approved, and that the address is right, things like that. And then she'll approve it, and it then goes to the final approver, and that is me right now. And I will look at making sure that everything is, again, allowable and that there aren't any errors on the purchase. So a few others, the other thing that you'll use marketplace for is if you have a small dollar contract. Also, if you have a big dollar contract, but that doesn't come up as much. So if you have a small dollar contract, that means less than $10,000, but the supplier has something for you to sign. So this has happened a few times, maybe with software development or something like that, where there is something to sign, but it's less than $10,000. So that is a small dollar contract, and we are not allowed to sign anything. So this contract still needs to go through the university process to make sure that a signing official, authorized signing official, signs the contract and puts in the proper language to work with the university. So this is a link here that we won't go into detail, but that this is a resource for when you need to do a small dollar contract that goes through Marketplace. And then once that contract is signed by both parties, you can either use a P card to make the purchase, and then you attach the contract when you are reconciling, or you make the purchase through Marketplace, and it creates you have then a requisition number from creating that small dollar contract. So the next method is the procurement cards and travel cards. So not everyone needs a P card or a travel card, so we ask that you talk to your manager to see if it is necessary for you. If you're making purchases for your project often, and there's no one on your team that has a P card, then it would be helpful for you to have one. Please just understand that there's a lot of responsibility that comes with your P card, and even if you are purchasing things for your project, the liability still again falls on you because it's your card. There are some trainings that you need to take in order to get a P card, and that is all listed in this link here of how to apply for a P card. The travel card, fewer people in our department have travel cards, so it really depends on how often you see yourself traveling. It is the recommended use when you travel of procurement method when you're traveling. However, if you only travel once a year, then it is acceptable to get reimbursed from your personal card or your personal funds. And this is the explanation here of how to get a travel card. All right, so we've gone through these first three, and next we're going to start talking about travel, which is a very important one because there are a lot of rules that from the university and from our department that have to do with travel. So this is going to take us step by step through the travel. And again, here's the picture of how we get there on this first step of how to get a travel approval. And this section is in the events and travel section of the form stack. So you have to be back out to the first page. So to start, the first thing you need to do is request travel approval. So you'll do that for domestic travel, you'll do that through FormStack. There is a way to do it through Concur, but our department has decided to use FormStack because it is more straightforward for both the submitters and the approvers to use FormStack than it is to use Concur. So what you'll do is you'll go through the travel approval in FormStack, and you want to make sure that you are very detailed there because that's where we need all the information about travel. And that includes if you have extenuating circumstances. For example, if you are planning on doing any travel that is not your home to meeting to home, you want to make sure that is clear on your approval form. Or if you are driving instead of flying, you would want to list that on the approval form. If you are extending your stay at all, that would also be listed. So make sure that you provide a lot of details so that Erin has the whole context. So Erin approves all travel for both non-employees and employees. And you can also if you have a bunch of people traveling for the same reason, you can do one form. Not everyone needs to submit a separate form, but you just need to make sure that everyone has that form because when you are reconciling your expenses, everybody needs access to that approval email to upload into their reconciliation. So that's the first step. And then the second step is to book your travel. So never, 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 never book your travel outside of Concur or CBT. So you'll go through the university system to book for Concur or CBT, through Concur or CBT. CBT is our travel agent, so that is a method of calling and they'll book for you. Concur is through the site. You can get there through your CU resources, and it's a pretty straightforward way just to book a flight, and they help you recommend which flights. So you want to choose a flight that is the least expensive, but option without creating circuitous routing, travel during unreasonable hours, excessively prolonged travel, results in additional costs that would offset savings, and does not meet your medical needs. So there are some, circumstances that might make it so you don't choose the least expensive option. And these bullet points here are directly from the cost principles for sponsored projects. So it is a reasonable rule where you're looking for a reasonable least expensive option, to summarize those bullets. So when you're booking, you can choose the recommended airline in Concur, because a lot of these things might come up with the airlines that are not recommended in Concur. However, you cannot, you don't want to choose, you still need to make decisions based on the price of the flight. When you are traveling, and I'm just making sure. Yep. Okay. So when you are traveling, this is a non-exhaustive list of things that can be reimbursed and cannot be reimbursed. So we do reimburse one checked bag per flight, unless there's a reason, like you're bringing, tabling supplies. Maybe that would be an exception where you'd be able to reimburse more than one bag. We reimburse transportation from home to the airport and back, and transportation from the airport to the meeting and back. We reimburse a rental car only if it's the least expensive option compared to taking taxis. And if we see a rental car on the reimbursement for your travel, we would hope not to also see taxis while you're in your location. We reimburse the hotel stay, as long as it is the reasonable price. And if it's at a conference, the preference is always to stay at the conference hotel. And if you're not going to stay at the conference hotel, that requires prior approval, because it's usually going to incur more costs. And there's also, the university also reimburses for staying with a friend. So if you choose to do that, you would get $25 a day. Again, that would be part of, you would need that to be prior approved. And any per diem that is not for meals that are not included in the meeting. So when you reconcile, which you'll see on the next slide, we do request that people upload their agendas, and that's so that we can see which meals were provided and whether or not you asked for per diem. The key things that are not reimbursable are transportation to a non-conference meal or activity. So if you're doing anything outside of your conference and you want to go into the city and get a meal, that is not something that is reimbursed because on a sponsored project, because it is considered an entertainment cost, the meal, and anything associated with the meal is also considered an entertainment cost. So that is not reimbursable. Room service. So if that's a university policy. If you have room service, that is not reimbursable because we do the per diem. Actual meal costs is pretty similar. We only do per diem. We don't reimburse for actual meal costs. Any alcohol in any situation, we will not reimburse. And then any flight or airport extras. So we don't pay for first class unless there's a medical reason. We don't pay for Clear or Wi-Fi. That is not, you cannot get that reimbursed by the university or by your sponsored project. So again, I just want for this kinds of things, a lot of detailed situations, specific situations come up with travel. And when you're asking for something to be reimbursed, again, just we go back to the reasonable and necessary test. Is this reasonable and is it necessary for my project for me to have this expense? And again, and also, would I be okay advertising that I purchased this and put it on federal and state funds? So after you travel, then you will reconcile. So make sure to do that within 30 days. And there's a lot of included documentation that you need to upload. So I will show you that in a bit, specifics on what is needed for what type of reconciliation. I recommend the moment you get home, just do this reconciliation because then you won't forget. And the reason that it's within, or if you wait more than 30 days, that income, that expense becomes taxable income. So it will affect your paycheck if you are not reconciling your travel expenses within 30 days. And that doesn't mean that it needs to be approved and go through all the approvals in 30 days. It just means that you need to submit it within 30 days. So just to go a little bit more detail into some of the things that happen a lot with travel, this is a really helpful resource, again, for university policy that I reference a lot when people are asking me questions. So always start at that link. It goes through all the different purchases that you need to make for travel and whether or not they're allowed and in what way. And then we reimburse mileage at the IRS rate less your drive from home to the office on a work day. So if you're traveling on a Monday, which is a work day, then you can only get reimbursed from the office to the airport. If you're traveling on a non-work day like Saturday or Sunday, then you can get reimbursed the whole amount. This does not apply for folks who have in their contract that they are a fully remote employee. So even if you are, however, if you are a hybrid employee and you tend to come into the office on Tuesday or Wednesday, if you're traveling on Monday, that still counts as a work day. So you only get the reimbursement from the office to the airport. So per diem comes up a lot. So this link here will show you what per diem rate you will receive at the location that you are going to. So if you want to know upfront how much you're getting reimbursed for, that is a helpful link. It includes 3 meals and incidentals, $5 of incidentals, and then your travel days, you only get 75%. So your first and last day, you only get 75% of the per diem. And then, like I've said, you subtract any meals that were included with the meeting or conference, but you do not need to save any meal receipts from your other meals because it's the per diem. Some people do decide to combine personal travel with business travel, but it is a little complicated because we, of course, cannot reimburse for personal travel. So if you choose to do that, your first step will be to say that you would like to do that during your approval stage and include a comparison flight of what that, including the personal travel, will be. So even if all you're doing is extending your trip, we still need a comparison flight for the 2 different departure dates. And then if the business travel is more than your personal travel, then you're okay. If the personal travel is more than if adding the personal travel is more than just the business travel by $1 or more, by any amount, then you will need to pay the difference using a cash receipt form. So what you'll do is we'll have this all in writing, and you will purchase the flight with the personal travel, and then you will need to be on campus and submit a cash receipt form with either cash or check that pays the difference and puts it back into the account that you paid your flight out of. So happy to go over that with more detail, but just be aware that that is a on-campus task, and it just includes a few extra steps if you want to do that. So non-employee travel also comes up a lot. So because we host a lot of events and a lot of people are coming from different places to come to our workshops and events. So you may find yourself helping and setting up travel and reimbursing for non-employee travel. So it's, as I said, this also goes through the same process of getting prior approval, and all the same rules are in place for non-employees than for employees as far as reimbursement and booking and extenuating circumstances. So we highly recommend that you book travel, that the employee books travel for the non-employees. And that is because we have found that if folks book flights on their own, they are very more likely to change their flights and incur additional fees for change in flights, and there's not as much control that you have. And as we've gone over, it's a sensitive expense on sponsored projects. So we need to make sure that the rules are being followed and that there aren't many, if any, canceled or changed flights. So other options, if you don't book the travel for the non-employees, they can book through CBT by calling, and you will need to fill out a form, which you can find more information about. So you would fill out a form, and then having all the information, and then you would have the non-employees work with CBT, and then you would still approve those flights. And then they can also book on their own and then request reimbursement, but we don't see that option often. It's very important to set expectations with a pre-travel email because of all these rules that we're going through, just to make sure that if someone is asking for reimbursement for something on the other side of travel, that you can easily say, oh, we set that expectation for you, that won't be reimbursable. So this link here does provide an example of a very good pre-travel email that kind of sets out all these expectations. And then understand that when you are working with non-employees to book travel, that you're working with CBT, you are in an approval role. And pretty much that means that you are on call during travel on the front end and the back end, and you are making important decisions on how to spend project funds and whether or not they are reasonable. So as I've gone through, a lot of the travel choices are really about doing that necessary and reasonable test. And so that is part of your role if you are in that approving role. So that means that you might get a call or an email from CBT when someone is traveling home and there's a circumstance that is making them change their flight, and you'll need to be the person to make the decision, or you will be asked to make the decision if that is an appropriate expense. Please understand that you don't need to feel alone when you're in that role, because really, none of us are in on-call roles. Like, that's not something that's in our job description. So feel comfortable reaching out to either the grant managers or Erin if a situation like this arises, and we can help you decide if it is an appropriate expense, and we can really help work with you. So don't feel like you need to do that on your own if you're in that position, but just remember that you do need to be available, or you need to find someone else to be available to make that those approvals. So I've gone through, we really want to cut down on cancellations and flight changes as much as we can. So that means that you want to be really clear about expectation setting, and that we only cancel flights or change flights for extenuating circumstances or, emergencies. We really shouldn't be changing flights because someone changed their mind about something. So be ready for when you're working with non-employees to be a little bit strict on those kinds of questions. And this is a rule that comes up a lot. If you have someone who's contracted with the university with an active scope of work, that travel, and they're traveling for your project, we need to include that travel in their scope of work. They can't have us pay upfront for their travel, and then, like we've been talking about in these cases, they need to pay on their own for their travel and get it reimbursed through an invoice like they do for their own work. And just to be really clear here, for both you booking the travel through CBT or them booking CBT, it gets put on a ghost card. So it is a great method if you do not want non-employees to have to front their flight costs. So for both employees and non-employees, like I said, remember to reconcile within 30 days and make sure that you are being consistent. And this is not just with travel, this is with all expenses, that you're being consistent with account codes and careful with speed types. So make sure that you're using if you're purchasing the same field supplies every single month, then you want to make sure that you're using the same field research supply account code every single month and not switching it based on what you think is right each month. So make sure that you're being consistent and then that you're using the right speed type per project. And when you're submitting when you're reconciling, you want to make sure you want to understand that the approver has no context. So we see a lot of these each week. And we don't necessarily know each purchase. So make sure that you are explaining exactly what is happening. So for travel, we always need to write in the comments what the travel was and what the dates were, because I process a lot of these and it takes a lot of time to decipher when it's not just clearly written. So please understand and expect that the approver has no context and provide as many comments as you can so that we understand what is going on. So this is a list of what to include when you are reconciling your expenses. So I'm not going to go through everything, but mostly this, you can reference this either through FormStack or on our site or on the internet or from this PowerPoint. But remember that it's usually not so simple. So when you are, everything that you submit requires that's above $25 requires a receipt. If you are allocating expenses across different speed types, you need a table or a few sentences on why that allocation exists. If you are going to a conference or an event, you need an agenda. If you are doing anything that, like I said, is an extenuating circumstance with your travel or you're driving instead of flying, you want to make sure that you are including those comparison flights, and also if you have reasons that you're doing something for medical reasons, you need to have that prior approval attached. And then if you have a something that's not usually allowed, and you've got sponsor approval, you'll either want to submit that sponsor communication or the unallowable or questionable charge, depending on the project. So next we're going to go into non-employee reimbursement. And this is how you get there. So when you're submitting for a non-employee reimbursement after they've traveled is the most commonly used case of this form. So the way that this works is PRAs collect non-employee reimbursements via a form that I'll show you on the next slide, and then process them through FormStack. And then our team processes the non-employee reimbursements through Concur. And this is so that we cut down on mistakes and make sure that across one workshop or conference or event that everything is being reimbursed consistently. And we often we try our best to pay upfront for as many expenses as we can, like the flights, so that we don't have folks paying upfront for their expenses and then having to apply for reimbursements. So the hope is that we have a low amount of reimbursements for non-employee, and that most of the stuff is happening through us. And I've said this before, but non-employees are following the same rules for reimbursements as employees. So this is what that reimbursement request form looks like. In blue, it's completed by project staff, and the white, the non-employees will complete. So this goes through all the different expenses, and it explains pretty carefully how we reimburse them and gives examples. So it's a helpful form that should guide people through each step, and this is linked here. And that obviously is also reached on the FormStack. And that's the end of it. So the next policy that we're going to go into is paying a business, organization, or other entity for services. So this means a scope of work or a consultant, someone doing a translation service, things like that. That's not an actual good or supplies. And here we have, either we're paying an individual or we're paying a business, and there's different processes for both of those. And I have a separate training for this, so I'm not going to go into depth here. That is linked here. So just to overview, if you're paying a person for goods or services, then you will need to set up an SOW, a scope of work, and that needs to be done prior to them doing any work. If you're paying a business, you don't need to set up a scope of work. They just need to be set up in the system as a supplier, and then they need to send an invoice. So different processes for whether we're paying an individual or an entity. Never, ever have a consultant do work before the scope of work is set up. And pretty much if that's not set up, they will not get paid for their work. So it is your responsibility to make sure that that consultant is set up with a scope of work. Next common thing that folks do is event planning. And so we do a new event intake meeting for most events that we host. So we really recommend that you meet with us in person, and you can request that here if you have a new event. And then we can go through, I'll show what that meeting looks like. And once you get the hang of it, we can do that intake offline. So once you meet with us a few times, you can fill out the form and we can email about how to go about making the purchases for the event. And the reason we do this is because there are many different things that you'll need to purchase, many different rules that are going to come into play that really don't come up until we start going through step by step the different, the different parts of the event. And so it's very helpful for both our team and your team to go through step by step and figure out what's needed to get the procurement answers that you need way ahead of time. There's a lot of processes that I have not included in this presentation, including large contracts like with a hotel. And this event planning meeting would be where we would go through how to do that so that you're not having, to keep all that information in your heads now. So that is a time for us to show you the steps that are needed for that type of purchase. So we recommend that if you're event planning, you start at least 4 months before the event. And really it should be started sooner, because especially if you're doing something like a large hotel contract, because those really do take upwards of 3 months to process. So it's really important that you give yourself plenty of time so that we're not pressuring anyone along that chain of approvals to get that contract done. Here I've linked a list of local vendors that the university has put together as part of a supplier diversity initiative that I just really like. And so they're prior approved and, working with the local community to get different food and different supplies for your events. We've already gone through this a lot, but just remember that food with federal funds is most often not allowable, so it can only be included if it is directly mentioned in the budget and necessary to carry out the project. And we need to make sure that we are clearly denoting between per diem and meals. So if you are planning an event that is not here, that is not on campus and is requiring everyone to travel, and your budget has per diem for food for all of the travelers, you are able to instead provide meals that would take the place of us reimbursing for per diem. But that is as far as it can go. So you have to try and make your meal expenses close to what the per diem rate is, and you can't provide additional expenses like snacks that wouldn't be included in those per diem rates. So if they're asking for per diem for breakfast because you didn't provide breakfast, but you did provide light pastries and refreshments, then those light pastries and refreshments are actually not allowable because they were not included in the budget and we're kind of then double paying for food. So you need to be really clear about, the meals that you're providing and whether or not how it is listed in the budget and whether we are traveling or not traveling. If you are not traveling, if it is on site on campus, then you need to make sure that food is listed directly, not as per diem, that is listed as in the budget. And in all of these cases, they need to be necessary. So it needs to be during a working meal, or it has to be during necessary for the carrying out of the workshop there, if there is food. So here is what our intake meeting looks like, and we go through all the different types of purchases that might come up, and we will, talk through some additional stipulations, talk through how to purchase them, who's going to purchase them, and what needs to be done. So this is a very helpful tool for you to know the next steps when you're event planning, because it can be quite overwhelming with all the procurement rules. So our last procedure is funding distributions. So I also have a training separate for how to fill out your funding distributions. So I will not go into too much depth here, but everybody has their own smart sheet that shows how you are divided, how your time and pay is divided between projects. Some people are only on one project, so they're going to be 100% on that one project. Some people are on multiple projects, so they're going to be divided up. We have a system where everybody is updating their own funding distribution sheets each month, working with their managers to do so. So you need to have a general understanding of your own distribution. However, recognize that if you are a PRA, that your manager or PI will have a deeper understanding and has control over the budget, and therefore, really knows how this should be, how your time should be divided. And so don't hesitate to work with your manager each month to make sure that your distribution is correct. You get a email to update your distribution, and so does your manager for your distribution. So they are also reviewing it. Overall, you want to keep changes minimal between month to month. You want to show consistency, because with our sponsors, if we're billing them at vastly different rates, that is an audit risk and kind of shows up when we invoice, when we are asking for funds. You do want to check, as I've said, your funding distribution monthly, so you can go in even if there's no change, and you'll mark that there's no change, just so that I know you've reviewed it. And if there is a change, or if you're confused about something, feel free to leave comments on your smart sheet, and you can tag me or your manager to come in and review it. There are the most common things that you want to look for are if you see yellow or orange or red on your smart sheet, that if it's orange, that means that a project speed type is about to end. And so that you need to either make a note for us that it has extended, and you need to extend that date and write in that date has extended, or you need to make sure that your distribution is coming off of that speed type before or right after it ends. If it's red, that means that the speed type has ended. So you certainly should not have any distribution on that speed type. Again, you will need to watch this training to get kind of the whole view of how to update your funding distribution. So next steps, just to kind of overview things that we've gone through in both of these trainings, and to how to keep going with your administrative learning. Make sure to go through this presentation and bookmark all the different links. Explore FormStack, so just kind of click through, pretend like you're doing things, and check to see if how to do things. There's really a lot of information there. Explore all the PSC pages that I linked, and explore the YouTube. I mentioned a lot of the different videos and trainings that are already on there. Make sure you have access to your funding distribution on Smartsheet, and that you understand the layout of your Smartsheet and why you're divided between the projects you are. Request your P card if you need it, request your travel card if you need it, and take the training to get access to be a shopper in Marketplace. And that is the training. Thank you.